Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. People of Reddit, what's the creepiest encounter you've ever had with a complete stranger? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I lived in a rental property on the west side of Albuquerque many moons ago, I had a census taker knock on my door. Okay, fine. I guess someone needs to do it. He asked me how many people lived in the home, how long I had been there, etc. Then he asks for my social security number as well as my wife's. No. I don't give my social security number to anyone except the IRS dude. He said, it's the law, you have to provide me with it. No, I absolutely do not. Now please leave. Him. I'll be back tomorrow. Sure enough, he shows up the next day banging on my door and yelling from outside. I know you're home. I know you're in there. I'll be back tomorrow. He came back a third day, knocking on the door, and I yelled through the door, I'm calling the police, you psychopath. Sure enough, the police show up 15 minutes later. He's still standing there with his clipboard. The police take his ID, he gets on the radio, and comes back 10 minutes later. Sir, there is no record of you working for the local census. You'll need to vacate the premises. Absolutely bizarre experience. Doesn't really give me chills, but was quite creepy. I was leaving a club with my friend and happened to walk out at the same time as two very, very drunk young women. They were so drunk, one of them kept saying, "Where's my phone? I lost my phone," until she realized it was half wedged into her top. They started talking to us, and I decided to make sure they got home safe. They didn't want to pay for an Uber and wanted to walk home despite not being able to walk and not being able to operate their phones. I insisted that they order it and did it for them. I also decided to wait to order mine because they were extremely vulnerable and unwise, probably recently 18. While this is happening, a very sketchy looking dude with a weird look in his eyes comes up to us. He asks if we want to go to an after party and mentions his Uber is on the way. I politely refuse for all of us, and he kinda hangs around, looking at the girls and looking toward the entrance of the club. His Uber, van-style people carrier with sliding door, pulls up. He opens the door and says nothing to the driver. Suggests we come to the party again. Waits for an uncomfortable amount of time and realizes we are not going to come. Closes the Uber door without saying anything to the driver, and the Uber drives off. He then makes his way back up to the club. He was in the club that night and probably followed the women out, but unfortunately for him, fortunately for them, they got talking to me. I was traveling north for the first time via Greyhound bus. I was 23 and nervous as hell, and as I was walking to the bus stop with my massive backpack on, I saw out of the corner of my eye a group of people leaning on the bus station's exterior walls. One woman had gotten up and started walking toward me. I ignored it because it's crowded, and I'm tunnel visioning my way to the bus stop since I've never traveled this way before. I'm almost at my stop when suddenly I feel the sharpest, most mind-numbing pain in my arm. Turns out this woman came up and with all her might elbowed me directly in the center of my arm as I walked past her. It literally knocked me 3 feet to the right. Out of reflex, I yelped and whipped my head around to her. She was dead still, stopped where she elbowed me, and was looking directly at me. Holy F. If the gaze this woman had on me wasn't like I murdered her entire family and spit on their graves while singing God Save the Queen, she looked ready to kill me, and I've never seen someone look at me that way. It made my stomach drop to my ass, and I just turned back around and walked even faster to my stop. Somehow, her eyes were both lifeless and full of utter hate for me at the exact same time. I had a bruise that spanned the entirety of my upper bicep, and I couldn't use my arm for basically the entire trip. I never want to be looked at that like again. I knew if I said something, did anything, this woman would do something absolutely insane. Well, more insane than knocking a 23-year-old lost-looking girl on her ass for no reason. When I was 14, my longtime childhood friend and I, both having super strict parents, used to sneak out in the middle of the night during our summer break just to hang out, walk around town, and generally sneak around feeling daring. One night, I went and stood outside her house at the usual time, but she didn't show. I eventually gave up and went to walk back home. About halfway back, a car came down the street toward me. I was on the same side of the road, and some instinct told me to cross to the other side. Just as I decided to do so, the car started slowing down, so I crossed, and it sped up again. As it passed me, the driver turned his face toward me and gave me a penetrating stare that chilled me. As the street was otherwise completely silent and deserted, I could easily hear this car reach the end of the road, then turn and head back my way. Thinking fast, I waited until he'd almost reached me before running back across the other side of the road. This time, the look he gave me was unmistakably angry. He sped up again, and as I was just passing a smaller side road, I ran down there as fast as I could. I knew there was an alleyway at the other end that I could get home through, and he couldn't drive down that way. Again, I heard a car reach the other end of the road and turn round again. As the sound of the engine approached, I dove behind a parked car. He came down my side road, driving very, very slowly. Peeking out, I caught a glimpse of the driver looking left and right as his car crept along the road. He was clearly looking for me. As soon as the car had turned a corner out of sight, I ran up to a nearby gravel driveway that turned out to have a couple of lock-up garages at the other end. By some amazing stroke of luck, I found one was unlocked. I slipped inside and pulled the door to, crawled under a tarp in a dark corner and just waited. A few minutes later, I heard a car door slam. Then I heard one of the most terrifying sounds I'd ever heard, footsteps on gravel. They came to my end of the driveway and just stood there for a while. I don't even know how he knew I was there, as he wouldn't have been able to see me go up there in my rearview mirror, unlike he presumably had with the side road, but apparently he did. Eventually he seemed to give up, and I heard the footsteps receding back down the drive. Then the car door slam and the engine rev up. I have no clue how long I stayed under that tarp in the pitch dark with my legs cramping up, but it felt like forever. It was morning by the time I got home. This was almost 30 years ago, but I can still feel those chills. A lifetime ago, when we used to hitchhike to the beach, my girlfriend and I got into a limo that stopped to pick us up on Queens Boulevard. It was older and not really great looking, but we didn't think anything of it. We were excited to get a ride in a big comfy car. We were 15. We pile in the back and the dude says, "Hell, where are we going?" We tell him Rockaway, and he says, "Holy shit, I'm headed there now." To our credit, we both looked at each other like that sounded off. Usually you'd get a ride only halfway, because it's kind of a big right turn off the route. We started noticing that the guy was really dirty. Then I noticed that the door handles in the back were missing. I was big for my age, and I had super long hair, almost to my waist. I looked a lot older than I was. I basically told the guy if he didn't let us out at the next light, I'd come through the partition and beat his ass to a pulp. He tried a whole lot of, "Hey man, just be cool, let's smoke this joint." I told him next light or I start tearing the car apart. He hits a button and the doors unlock. I push Mary out and follow her. The dude had something planned, and it wasn't good. I mean, that scenario, considering it was in the 90s, could have either been the beginning of the greatest buddy comedy movie ever, or a twisted Eli Roth horror movie. And it's a coin flip. I think you made the right call. When I was 8 and in 3rd grade, 1994, I was walking to the bus stop. My apartment complex was technically zoned for another school, so it took a few minutes longer. A man who looked just like Chris Farley said, "I hate Mondays, don't you?" I remember he had a yellow Letterman jacket on. I don't know if it was an actual school one or more likely a name brand one. I said yes, because he seemed friendly enough, and he just kept walking with me as I walked to the bus stop. Well, he said a few other normal enough sentences. All of a sudden he had his penis out and asked if I'd like to touch it. I said no thank you and shook my head. Then he asked me, an 8-year-old, if, quote, "Well then, can I take your pants down and lick your..." Well, I again said no. He said, "Okay then, have a nice day," and left. We were still in my complex. I didn't know what to do and didn't even think of going home, so I still walked to my bus stop, rode the bus as normal, then went immediately to the office bawling my eyes out. I told the office what had happened. My parents were called and the police were called. I showed my parents and the police where it happened in the complex, and a couple of other times my stepdad tried to walk with me to look for that creep. I took an alternate route to the bus stop after that, crossing in front of the complex as opposed to through the complex. One time, the only other time, a couple of that side of the complex though, I would never go alone on that anymore. I actually saw him drive by. Sick mother smiled and waved at me in that fake friendly manner he used when he first talked to me, like as if he hadn't traumatized me. Unfortunately, he was leaving, and all I could tell was that he was obviously coming from the side of the complex where he had walked from the first time, but I obviously didn't see what apartment or anything. I ran and got my stepdad and told him the color of car, and he went and looked, but nothing. That was the last time I ever saw the guy, but that's definitely the creepiest stranger encounter ever, and I've had a few creepy encounters. I'm lucky he didn't kidnap me, especially considering the time period. It was a sunny Sunday. We slept until like 8 a.m., opened the front door and let the dogs out to sniff around the garden and pee. I cooked coffee in the kitchen, still in my pajamas, and chatted with my husband. Right when I was pouring the hot water over the coffee powder in the French press, we heard our eldest dog bark like crazy. Then we heard the garden gate. It's made of metal, so quite loud if closed with force, and the barking got even crazier. I still remember how both my husband and I froze, looking at each other before we both rushed out of the front door. I was first and ran into a guy who was about to walk further into the garden and stopped when I came out turning to me. I connected the dots and realized he had planned to go after our dog, who was nowhere to be seen and who obviously had fled into the garden. The guy was dressed in a wife-beater shirt that had already sweated through, tattoos all over. He had a sledgehammer in one hand, a knife in the other hand. As soon as my eyes fell on that knife, my brain went empty, and all I could think of was getting this dude off of our property. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking, and basically managed to talk this guy out of our home. I could no longer remember what I said or what I thought, but it worked. He told me he had personal issues, and that his life was in shambles. Said sad story about his aunt. As soon as he was out of the garden gate and went his way, my husband called the cops. He tried to flee, but one of their dogs caught him. We learned later that he was full on drugs. Later, we discovered that he had already hit our dog at least once with the sledgehammer. That's why our sweet, protective baby fled into the garden. The vet said that if the guy had hit one of our smaller dogs that day, they'd have been dead. But our eldest dog weighed like 80 pounds and was lucky that he was only hit between the rib cage and hip, so fleshy area. My husband later told me that he had been terrified of me getting killed. Because I was so close, he said no safe way to intervene and get me out of the way without the dude losing it completely. Throughout that day, I was in a strange disbelief, as if I narrated a story. The next day I snapped. I suddenly realized how freaking dangerous the whole incident had been and couldn't stop crying. Also, it took me years to again feel safe at home, and to this day, I have a strange feeling when opening the front door for the dogs. I used to always shop at this one Target years ago, and I started to notice a man that seemed to always be in the store the same aisles as me every single time. Then I started to see him in other places I would be at. The last trip to Target, I was in the CD section and he came up next to me talking about CDs, and something in my gut told me to get as far away from him as possible. I left my car and quickly left the store, and as I fumbled around for my keys, yes, I should have had them out beforehand, someone grabbed me from behind and started to drag me across the parking lot. There were two guys who were in the parking lot at the very front by the store who saw this and started yelling and screaming and running toward us. The man dropped me off, got in his car and took off. One of the men got the license plate number, and what the police discovered in his car and home still sends me into a panic attack to this day. He had essentially a kit in his car with rope, duct tape, etc., and in his home he had hundreds of my pictures hung up on his walls with a cage set up in his basement they suspect was for me. The creepiest part is that he had a picture of me and my mom from one of those Sears portrait studios from when I was like 5 years old, with a note to him on the back of the picture from me. Apparently, we lived in the same apartment complex for a short period together, and I was a childhood friend. I don't remember him. We moved around a lot. I was a kid about 12 years old at the time. I was traveling with a few family members, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, and my 2 cousins. They rented a big van for us to all ride together. We had lived in Rhode Island at the time, but were traveling to Lake George in New York for a vacation. About halfway through our drive up there, we stopped to get some pizza. It was a totally random pizza place in a completely random town. I don't remember where exactly. I remember I started to get queasy from car sickness, and the adults decided that we should stop to eat since it was the halfway point anyway. For extra context, I had never been there before in my life, never to Lake George, and certainly to this particular pizza place before. We get in there and start eating pizza. There was an arcade on the complete opposite side of the restaurant from where we were seated. I decided I was going over there with my cousin, who was the same age as me. He wasn't done yet though, so I said I would meet him over there. I get up and cross this extremely busy restaurant. It was really noisy, and even if I had been talking to someone at the time, no one nearby would have been able to discern or make out anything. So right as I'm entering the arcade area, this little girl, probably 7 or 8 years old, walked straight up to me from the crowd. She looked just like the little girl from the Poltergeist movie, long, pale blonde hair and blue eyes. I also remember she was wearing a light-colored sundress. She stopped right in front of me, looked me dead in the eye, and clearly said, "Hi," my real first name. I stared at her dumbfounded. I had no idea who this kid was. She took off right after she said it. I tried to find her afterwards to point her out to my family members. None of them believed me except for my cousin. But we couldn't find her. It still bugs me how this kid in a totally random town in a random place somehow knew my name. When I was in 3rd grade, I was on a local community service soccer team, and normally parents would be acting as coach and assistant coach, but the parent who did the assistant coach position was sick that day, so community service center sent a random middle-aged woman to act as an assistant coach for that game. Well, it also happened to be my best friend's birthday that day. I'll call her Millie for this. And so she was having a sleepover party after the game, and the whole team was invited. So we were all being normal little girls, being super excited and talking nonstop about the sleepover at Millie's. And it was about halfway through the game when the assistant coach lady called me over by name, and my instincts instantly knew something was off because my stomach dropped. I went over to her reluctantly and stood a couple of feet away, but she wiggled her finger to motion me closer to her. She said, "Closer," again, until I leaned in enough. Then she said, "Hey, I just want you to know that I'm Millie's mom, so you'll be coming home with me today after the game. As soon as the game is over, come right with me to my car. Don't stop to talk to anyone." I got such bad vibes, so I clung close to Millie for the rest of the game. And then as it ended, I said, "Millie, I'll explain later, but after the game, let's run to your mom's car, okay?" And thankfully, she didn't question me, and we rocketed to her mom's car as soon as the final whistle rang out. And I think up till that point, I had retained some hope because I didn't think adults would just lie like that. But when we got in the car, a totally different woman turned around, and when I asked, "Wait, are you Millie's mom?" she looked super confused and said, "Yes, I am. Why?" And I explained what happened while on the drive home to Millie's, and she was super, super concerned and told me to tell my parents the next day. But when I told my parents, they thought I was making it up and didn't believe me. I was their firstborn, so I think they figured kids just lie about that stuff. I don't really know, to be honest. My grandmother believed me, though, and for that I'm thankful, because I felt very scared and alone and confused because I didn't understand why that lady would have tried to take me like that. I was living near the Appalachian Trail in Maine. I'd regularly go for an outing in my late teens or early 20s. I'm peacefully walking with my very friendly and very social dog who evidently likes 99.999% of people she meets. And she's happy walking alongside me when suddenly that 0.0000001% person happens to walk by us going the other direction on the trail. Immediately upon seeing this guy, my dog's fur was standing straight up on end like a mohawk going from her neck to the base of her tail. She only did that around aggressive dogs when she was younger as a means of telling them, "Leave me alone, I will defend myself if necessary." And before this stranger walked by, I wouldn't have imagined her capable of doing that toward another human being because of how much she loved meeting new people. Seriously, because of her friendly and docile demeanor, it just didn't seem like a scenario that would even unfold, yet this person merely walking by us spooked her and myself badly. My dog is 15 years old now, and that one time is still to this day the only time she's shown defensive aggression toward any human at all like that. Think like a golden retriever, but never even barks when someone shows up. She doesn't even make a peep at the vet or mailman or anything. She wags her tail normally, or rarely in certain situations, she shows fear or discomfort in non-aggressive ways. This person could have possibly been close to 7 feet tall, gray beard, the wallet chain rattling with each step, boots that seemed better suited for conflict and less for hiking, and my inner voice was saying, "Look out, that's a dangerous person." I had some tough-looking friends growing up, and at times genuinely dangerous friends because they would act recklessly and run their mouths and get into fights, etc. So I don't typically judge a book by its cover. I've learned to read actions and body language more than a crazy style or whatever genetics you were born with. But for anyone trying to paint a mental picture here, just imagine this person as looking like a road-weary biker who got kicked out of his motorcycle gang and is as tall as a basketball player in the middle of the woods, chain rattling, dark clothes, black vest. But it wasn't the look of the person. It was the way they were walking that did it for me. I could be wrong, but I didn't seem like they were out there hiking. I'll just put it that way. I was genuinely chilled to the bone. What really got me even more was my dog and I both getting deeply spooked in a primitive or instinctual way like that. So that. I went on a girls' trip to Orlando, Florida back in 2017. We had taken an Uber from our hotel so we could have a few drinks. We wanted to check out this cool steakhouse that was lit up in cool neon pink lights. We got in the Uber, and our driver was the nicest man. We had a good conversation on the way to the restaurant. When he dropped us off, he asked if we needed him to hang out for a minute in case we changed our minds. We told him we should be fine and he could leave. I was confused when he asked if we had any bills. We get inside, and it's a strip club, lol. The guy at the counter wouldn't let us inside because we weren't being accompanied by a male. No problem. We didn't want a stay anyway. We decided to go wait outside and get another Uber. I can't remember what we were all wearing that night, but I know it was the crop top, Charlotte Russe fashion era, if you know, you know. A man approached us asking if we needed a ride, claiming he was a taxi driver. I didn't buy it. He was driving an older Toyota Corolla. He kept asking where we were going and became persistent that he give us a ride. We had all declined at least twice, and he just wouldn't leave us alone. 2 men were walking up to the main entrance and saw what was going on and stayed with us until our other Uber came. I often wonder what the guy wanted. Trafficking is all I can think of, but I'm thankful these men stayed with us until our ride came. I never caught their name, but if we were at Rachel's Steakhouse in May of 2017 and this was you, thank you.